happened was they made some changes on version 2, and one of the problems was those changes were not well communicated. So people who bought the Hawk board didn't realize that when they bought their second Hawk board, they got actually a different design. So here's a Hawk board, and normally I wouldn't touch this board without proper ESD protection, but unfortunately, even though this is a good board, it doesn't have much value to me because the whole community around this board more or less collapsed. So here's kind of the history when I went and looked back through the mail log of what happened. On September 15th last year, a customer posted, "Hey, I'm having trouble with a Hawk board. Here's what I did." And they didn't whine. They say, "Oh, my Hawk board doesn't work." What they said is, "I have 2 Hawk boards, and I look at the NAND chip or SD-RAM chip, and it's one part number, and I just got 2 new Hawk boards, and it has a different part number. I didn't know they changed the design." So one of the things happened in the community was a change was made and it wasn't communicated. There was this no response, the speak no evil. And so the post was one of the best I've ever seen because it was incredibly detailed that said, here's what I've tried, works on 2 boards, doesn't work on another 2 boards. They're all supposed to be identical. Would someone please help me? Real reasonable question. October 29th, if I calculate that, that is 6 weeks later. 6 weeks later, the company that makes the Hawk board, which I won't mention by name here, except to say it had nothing to do with TI. Hawk board has a TI chip on it. But the version 2 board, they came out with an email that said, "Oh, there's no hardware problem." And it was evident that the testing they were doing was loading the bootloader on the board. And for the most part, the bootloader worked. But when you loaded the Linux kernel and tried to boot the Linux kernel, it very, very seldom worked. But that wasn't part of their test process. So six weeks go by before there's any response. And so everybody wondered, what's going on? Then on December 19th, they said, we have a solution. So it went from, there's no problem, do we have a solution? Well, that's another 6 weeks that goes by, wondering if this board I bought is working or not. So we have a solution, and they proposed the solution. And I was amazed at the dedication of the community to try the solution. There were some critical timing registers that you really had to understand how SD-RAM worked, and one other timing subsystem I forgot. Lots of discussion in detail about what those values should be and trying them. And a lot of people got their boards to work like 95 or 95% of the time, but then they'd crash. They'd let it run for a few hours and it would crash. And so the solution didn't work. So on January 15th, they tried for a whole month to get that fix to work. And on January 15th, another user of the board said, this fix just doesn't really fix it. All the while, the company that made this hardware hardly ever responded to a single post. And it wasn't until January 25th that TI came out and basically said, we've analyzed the design, and the design doesn't follow our standards, and that's why this board has a faulty design, and they recommend some other boards that could be used. So it was too bad because I really like the price and the form factor of this board. This processor that's on the board, you can get it in 3 or 4 different form factors, so we still use this processor a lot with all the same IOs, but the boards are a lot bigger and a little bit more cumbersome. So I was really sorry to see this happen, and the worst part for the company that did it, oh, I got one more for you. So I just cut this straight out of one of the emails. This is the last thing they did wrong, if there wasn't already enough. So they had returned the board and in a month hadn't got their refund. And the distributor said, I didn't get the money from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer said, I didn't get the money from the distributor should be paying you. And so this guy was so frustrated, he just wanted someone to step up and say, you know, who's responsible for getting my refund to me because this hardware doesn't work? And the problem with this is with the web this turns up forever on the web. And so anybody that looks up this company name that made the board is going to find out how they treated their community. And I would personally never feel comfortable using their hardware again. So when you get involved in a community, you create a ethic around your project, if you will. And if you, thank you, if you do, if you make a lot of missteps, people will notice, and those stay around for a long time. So you've been through your first successful project. You didn't make all the mistakes they made on Hawkboard. You communicated well. You added some value to the project, and now you've got your own project that you want to start. You want to build your own community around that. How do you go about it? Well, first off, it takes dedication. Some of these projects last tens of years, so you might be involved with it for a long time. Make sure it's something that you really enjoy. If there's already an existing project, there's not really very much value in starting your own. Join up with them, make what they have better instead of two independent implementations of the same thing. I've made this mistake before. I pre-announced what I was going to do, and then I never got around doing it. That's really embarrassing. So try to get a little something working to prove your concept. That'll help you get other developers to join in who are interested in what you're doing. And then look for a sponsor. You might be surprised that you can get paid for doing some of this. So leverage your expertise. If you're involved in a project, a lot of these projects offer, hey, if you have trouble with this and you want professional support, you can pay us and we will support you. There's a lot of companies that make money around that model, including RidgeRun. And then you can always hold the carrot that, oh, you want this feature? Well, we'll implement it next if you pay for us to implement it next. Otherwise, I'm going to implement the feature that's most important to me. So you can get some funding by extending something that you love with a feature that you really think is cool and letting someone else pay for it. And this is probably the key one for most of you in this room, is that when I get a resume, I look, has this person contributed to an open source project? And one of the reasons that that's really critical to me is because it's easy for me to verify. Is this person being truthful? Did they make a real contribution to the project or not? And it's only the internet away. I can find all of that out in 5 minutes. So if you get involved in an open source project and you're making contributions, your name's going to show up on internet searches with that project. And be sure to put that on your CV, because that will be a big distinguishing factor for many employers that are looking for people who can prove that they've made good contributions to a complex project. So most people don't realize this, but 70% of the work on Linux is paid work. There is a report by the Linux Foundation that came out a month or two ago with a lot of interesting statistics on Linux. I don't make very many improvements to Linux that I don't get paid for. And I think that's it. Do we have time for a question or two? Any questions? Well, I'll be around the rest of the day and tomorrow if you want to talk about a project that you think's interesting and would like some ideas about how to get started, if you're interested in doing that in an open source way. Thank you.